Hey everybody, this video will discuss Wwise events. A Wwise event is a series of commands that allow you to start or stop music objects, to play triggers or stingers within your game, or to start transitions. And we're going to learn about those within Wwise today. So what I've done is open up the branching project from last week that we finished for the assignment. And I'm going to use that and build on top of that to flesh it out and then create events that correspond to many of the structures that we created last week. So let's go ahead and get our project open correctly. Let's open the project and then choose the designer layout here. And if you remember from last week, we have a game music switch, which goes between 3 different states. We have an intro and an end. And then we have 3 stingers. And in the Game Syncs tab, we set up a game state. We created 3, so this is a state group, and we created 3 states inside of that state group. In fact, just to clean things up, I'm going to call it a state group. Then we have 3 triggers, and those 3 triggers trigger an encounter stinger, a find item stinger, and an open treasure stinger. Okay, so let's talk about events. So again, designer layouts. We're going to the events tab here, and currently I don't have any events, but let's add a few. The first one we're going to add is our game is going to need to start up the music somehow. So if we right click on default work unit, we're going to create an empty event for right now. So empty event, but you can start with kind of a play or stop. We'll do these a little bit later, but I'll create an empty event for now and call it start game. Currently, there is nothing in the start game event. We can add new events or new commands within that start game event, which is what we're going to do. So when we start up the game, we want to do 2 things. We want to play, so we're going to add the play object. And what are we going to play? So I'll select that and then browse for my music game switch. So essentially we're starting our music game switch when we start our game. That makes sense. But when I look at my audio tab and I look at my game music switch, I could either be in none, explore, combat, or chase. Let's go ahead and set that to in our new event because we want to start with explore music. So I'll go back and I'll select the start game. Then I'll go ahead and add in another command. You can see there's lots of different commands here. I'm going to add in a state command where we're setting the state to explore. So browsing for explore, like this. So we're setting the state when we play the switch container. So we play the switch container and then immediately go into explore. So we can hear explore music right away when the start game is triggered within the game itself. Great. Let's add a few more. At some point in our game, we're going to want to switch to a specific state like chase, or if your game has locations in it, you're going to want to flip to a new location or something like that. So let's go ahead and this time when we create the event, instead of creating an empty event and doing it from scratch, we can actually start with setting a state. So set state like this, and I'll call this set state chase. And I still have to set up the target, so I'll set the state, browse for my target. In this case, I'm using chase, but use whatever is working in your game. That's all I want to do. Because when we start the game, we're playing this music switch already. We don't need to replay it anymore. We just need to kind of flip between states at that point. All right, cool. So we have a set state chase. Let's add the other two in so that we can flip back and forth. Again, adding, I'm going to start with the state, set state. Oops, clearly I'm adjusting the wrong one here. So you can actually remove, right click and delete. What I wanted to do is select this here and then new child, state, set state. Okay, and then I'm going to call this set state explorer. I'm going to select the command browse for the target, which is in this case explore. So we have set state chase and set state explore. And let's do the last one. So also, again, right clicking, then we're going to start with the set state command. I'm going to name it set state fight. We've created, but we want to target the correct state. So we'll browse for the combat state. I guess I should call this set state combat since that's the name that I used before. Okay, so I have my 3 states here. Now I need some other events in here. We need the stingers to play. And so I want to go ahead and add a stinger. To do that, again, right click on default work unit, new child, and I'm going to set up the trigger. So trigger, and I forget what mine are called, so I'm going to go back over to game syncs. I have encounter, find item, and then open treasure. So I'll go back to the events tab. I didn't name it, it's just named generically trigger. I'll go ahead and rename this to stinger encounter. And I have to target it here. So that's just the name, but I'll target it here by browsing for the correct trigger, which is stinger encounter. You can copy and paste these. In fact, maybe I'll use that as a starter. So right click, copy, and then I can kind of right click in the same area and then hit paste, and then it will have another stinger, and I can rename that stinger. So my second stinger was find item. So I'll go in here and say, change the name of this to find item. Like that. I'll have to then retarget this trigger since I started with a copy to find item. And then I have a third one. I'm going to create this one from scratch. So right click, new child, scroll down to trigger, and I'll call this stinger. I'm trying to remember what the last one was. The stinger is open treasure. Okay, so stinger open treasure. I have to select a target for this, so targeting that open treasure. So I now have all 3. So when the game starts, we set the state to explore and play our main switch, and then we can switch between these different states that we have. At the same time, we can play these triggers, and these triggers would then play the stingers. So there's just 2 more that I want to add. One is I want to set another state that brings us back to none. So state, set state, and I'll name it set state none. So when we're leaving, say, the combat state and we go to none, it will play our ending that we've set up over here. So if you remember from last week, when we're in the gameplay switch here, when I went from any different playlist to none, we played our end transition. And vice versa when we started up. When we started with none and played we played our intro. So let's go ahead and go back to events, and the set state none that I have here when I select it, let's go ahead and browse for the none state, which is at the very top here. Oops. Browse states none. Okay. So now everything is set up. There's one more that I want to do, which is maybe stop game. So I could do new child. I'm going to create an empty event here. And I'm going to call this stop game. Or maybe stop music, which we could do with none here. When I do none here, in the background, this music game switch is still playing. So when we stop the game, maybe as a last little thing, we'll also stop. Choose the stop command here, and then browse for target, and we'll stop our game music switch. Now this is different than setting to none. If I stop it, it's not going to play our ending transition. In order to do that, we have to do none first. So there's a couple options that we could do here to get it to play cleanly. So we could add, for instance, before we stop, what we'll do is maybe set the state to none. Browse, state none. Oops, did the same thing. I think that's a bug. None here. All right, so set state none. And then, so we want it to play the none first. So it's going to switch to none, play our ending, and then we want the game music switch to stop. So what we want to do for that is to play it later. And each command has details that we can modify. And one of the details that we can modify is we can modify what's called a delay. So we're going to delay this. So if our ending that we've written for our piece is 10 seconds long, then we delay the actual stop by 10 seconds. So we put 10 here because this is in seconds. There's one other thing that I want to go back to and revisit, which is on the stingers themselves. On the stingers themselves, there are two types of scopes happening. What is scope? So when I click stinger encounter and I have it set, there are two options here, game object and global. We want these to be global. Game object and global, the way they work in a game is global means there's kind of like one happening. So if I have multiple characters in the game and I have encounters for each one of those characters, then I might put that in game object so multiple will play at the same time. But in this case, we only have it's a first person, so I only have one encounter. So change these to global. These are a little bit more challenging to understand, the difference between global and game object. But let's explore and let's go ahead and set all our stingers to global. We're setting those all to global. Another example of how it might work where it is set instead of global, it's set to game object would be when you have footsteps. Say I have two characters in the game and one is walking on carpet and one is walking on concrete. If I have it set for global, then both would, have one of those, either concrete or carpeting. But if I have it set to game switch, to game object, then the person that's walking on carpet and the person that's walking on concrete will have their own separate surfaces. So you kind of think of global as one, they're called instances, one instance. So in our game, we only could have one person opening a treasure chest at a time, which is good, which is what we want. If it's a multiplayer game, maybe we want to set this to game object. So These are how you might use global and game object. For most music things, it's going to be global. So that's how we have it set up. In our next video, we're going to start talking about how to get these a little bit more into the game and start testing them using the Soundcaster. Last part of this is you can actually get this to play by selecting Start Game and pressing play. And then it will play our objects that we have. So in this, remember, the Start Game started the music gameplay switch and then went to Explore. So we heard the intro, now we're in Explore. And when I switch though, it's gonna just stop things. So what if we wanted to kind of test all this and simulate it in real time? We can do that using the Soundcaster. We can start setting this up and simulating what our game's going to be like. So I'll see you in the next video.